Hi folks, it's Slyall, your friendly tour guide with Manhattan and Beyond Tours. And other times we operate walking and bicycle tours in New York City, primarily in Central Park, but we do other locations. If you're receiving this from us, you may have taken a tour in the past. I've created a little video historical presentation on the Maine Monument, one of my favorite monuments here in New York City, which is located at the entrance of Central Park and Columbus Circle. If such things interest you, please consider it a gift. Manhattan and Beyond Tours is establishing a subscription, and I invite you to subscribe so we can pass along discounts, random blogs on New York topics, new tour announcements, and anything pertinent to Manhattan and Beyond Tours. What I promise is it will not send you a lot of stuff. It will not flood your mailbox or anything of that. Maybe once a month, probably less. So please enjoy and subscribe. Does anyone remember the Maine? There are many statues in New York City, but few are as ornate or complicated as the Maine Monument, located in Columbus Circle at the entrance to Central Park. Rising 63 feet above the sidewalk, the USS Maine National Monument is a pylon featuring 11 larger-than-life figures. It's topped with a gold-leaf Columbian triumphant. Many people walk by this monument daily, but very few really know what it's about. In this mini documentary, we will detail the history behind the Maine Monument. Who paid for it? Who designed it? Who carved it? And how did the artist use symbolism to describe the story of the Maine? Installed on May 30th, 1913. The architect was a Harold Van Buren McGonigal, and the sculptor was Attilio Piccirilli, who was a member of the Piccirilli family, an Italian family of marble carvers who lived in the Bronx. They did the Custom House here in New York City, and they were also involved with the Lincoln Memorial. The pylon was constructed using granite from Maine, and the sculptures are carved in Tennessee pink marble. It is topped with a gold leaf bronze statue cast from the metal of the guns recovered from the Maine itself. The monument was paid for by a subscription led by the New York Morning Journal, whose owner, William Randolph Hearst, uses paper to garner support to memorialize the Maine. Thousands of dollars were raised from New York school children who gave in pennies to wealthy donors to help pay for this memorial. Remember the Maine, and to hell with Spain. No offense to my Spanish friends. Lo siento a mis amigos de España. But let me relate the story behind the monument so we can get a clearer understanding of where that slogan came from. Cuba struggled for 100 years to rid the Spanish rule, and by 1898 Cuba and Puerto Rico were the last two Latin American countries who had not gained independence from Spain. American sentiments were with the Cuban revolutionaries. To protect American interests in Cuba, the United States sent a ship called the USS Maine to Havana Harbor. As you can see, it was an early day steam-powered ship, yet it retained the masts. It took 9 years to build, and advances in the reliability of the steam vessels resulted in the ship being obsolete by the time it was built. On the evening of February 15th in 1898, the Maine suddenly blew up and sank to the bottom of Havana Harbor, killing all 260 men on board instantly. No one really knows why the ship blew up, and investigations theorize that methane gases produced by the coal on board spontaneously combusted, triggering an explosion. There was also speculation that the ship was destroyed by a Spanish torpedo or mine. While an investigation into the origin of the explosion pursued, Assistant Secretary of the Navy Theodore Roosevelt called the coal bin explosion unsubstantiated in that it is possible the ship was blown up by a mine. In 1889, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper, the New York Journal, was embroiled in newspaper wars with Joseph Pulitzer's New York World. These newspapers were engaged in yellow journalism, or what we now call fake news. After the sinking of the Maine, they worked hard to sell newspapers by printing many articles that would inflame the situation and sway public sentiment against the Spanish. These newspapers printed articles on the Spanish atrocities. They exaggerated, they tailored what little information they had to fit a story, or they just made things up to sell more newspapers. This also pushed America into war by making it appear that the Spanish blew up the Maine. The sinking of the Maine on February of 1898 did not result in an immediate declaration of war, but it created a situation that could not be reversed. On April 21st of the same year, the Spanish declared war on the United States. The period between the sinking of the Maine in February of 1898 and the declaration of war in April of the same year can be considered a period of mourning the loss of the men of the Maine for people in the United States. It is also one where yellow journalism and hawkish politicians pushed the United States into war. Their cry was, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain." The Spanish-American War lasted only 10 weeks. Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders stormed San Juan Hill, and Admiral Dewey sank the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay. The war was fought on land and on the sea, in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. By August 12th in 1898, the aggressions ended, which eventually resulted in the Paris Agreement. In this treaty, the United States gained the stewardship of Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam, propelling the previously isolated USA into a world power. The Maine Monument memorializes the loss of life in the sinking of the Maine and those who died in the Spanish-American War. It also recognized America becoming a world power. Lastly, it celebrates the emergence of Cuba as a new and independent nation. Now let's look at how the architecture chose to relate the story in the creation of the Maine Monument. But first, people often see public monuments but do not know who the subjects are, what they did, or even the event that is being memorialized. Looking closely at a statue, you may be able to interpret the symbols that artists use to tell this tale, even if you do not know who's being honored. When observing a monument, you might ask yourself a few questions. Where do your eyes go first? Often in the Maine Monument, people look at the top because it's gold-leafed and very bright. What are the objects in the sculpture? Are they human figures? Equestrian? Are they on horses in groupings? How are they dressed? Are there any allegoric figures or props and inscriptions? How are the figures positioned? All these clues help one identify what is being honored. The Maine Monument is considered post-Civil War classicism, which combines ancient symbolism and modern-day elements. This very complicated monument contains 11 larger-than-life figures, one on top, 5 in the front, one on the east and the west sides, and 3 figures in the back. We will look at each of these groupings and relate how they tell the story of the Maine and the Spanish-American War. Starting with the top, which highlights a gilded bronze Columbia triumphant, the Greek goddess of liberty and the personification of America. We are all familiar with another Columbia, the Statue of Liberty. Said to be cast from the guns recovered from the Maine, she stands tall in a seashell chariot pulled by 3 hippocampi, which are half horse and half seahorse. This symbolizes that the war was fought on both land and sea. Although it is difficult to observe from the street level, you can see the fishtails of the hippocampi on the east and west sides on the top. She holds her left hand high, clutching an olive branch, a symbol of peace, and wears a laurel on her head, which is what is worn by victors. In her right hand she holds a fascis, which was a bundle of sticks tied together to hold an axe. This was a symbol of Roman authority. Together, the top grouping symbolizes the power of the United States of America. They were victors, and peace now reigns. The front of the pylon, for which Columbia sits atop, bears the inscription, "To the valiant seamen who perished in the Maine by fate unwarned, in death unafraid." Below this inscription stands a grouping of 4 figures that is entitled Antebellum State of Mind, Courage awaiting the flight of peace, and Fortitude supporting the feeble. Antebellum state of mind, meaning the United States state of mind before the war with Spain. This grouping consists of 4 figures called Peace, Courage, Fortitude, and Feeble. The central figure of a robed woman is Peace. She's standing over the other figures with her arms outstretched because peace reigned during the period between the sinking of the Maine and when the war began several months later. The male figure below her right hand is Courage. His muscles are bulging and he is in a tense position, not at all relaxed. He is awaiting the flight of peace so that he might take action against the aggressor for this atrocity of the Maine. The female figure is Fortitude. She is seen hugging a crying child who represents the feeble. In a sense, she is comforting the nation during this period of mourning. And she's also comforting those who are affected by the sudden loss of lives in the blowing up of the Maine. Protruding out from the pylon is the prow of a boat. In it, there is a figure of a boy who is half kneeling and standing. His hands are outstretched, and originally he held 2 wreaths representing peace and victory. This child could be construed as representing Cuba as a new and emerging nation. On the east and west sides of the pylon are carved the names of those who perished in the Maine, in fate unwarned. Below the names on each side is a reclining Poseidon-like figure. One is young, the other one is old. These 2 figures represent the oceans the war was fought, the Atlantic and the Pacific. Although my research has shown me conflicting views, I believe the older male figure represents the Atlantic because it would have been the ocean Americans have known the longest. Further evidence is, as you can see, one of the objects by the old man is a lobster with claws, which are primarily found in the Atlantic Ocean. The younger figure on the east side represents the newer Pacific Ocean. Notice the fingers on his right hand. This fragile statue, carved in marble, has seen a lot of abuse over the years. It has been restored and maintained by the Central Park Conservancy and by generous public donations. Moving to the back of the monument, we find an inscription on the pylon that reads, "To the free men who died in the war with Spain, so that others might be free." Below this inscription is a grouping of 3 more figures who represent the events after the war ended. It is entitled Post-Bellum Idea, Justice Receiving Back the Sword Entrusted to War, while history records the events. The 3 figures are Justice, War, and History. There are also 2 important elements which are missing. The central standing figure is Justice. In her left hand, she originally held a scale. The scale is now gone. Both Peace in the front and Justice in the back are robed figures, while the rest of the figures are mostly unclothed. Under the right hand of Justice is the male figure War. His uplifted hand once held the sword he was returning to Justice. Justice had been served. America won the Spanish-American War. Lastly, we have the female figure of History, a woman after my own heart. She is recording the events of the Maine for future prosperity and education. Throughout the monument there is symbolism in addition to the statue groupings. The top of the pylon is lined with aquatic symbols like trident forks, starfish, jellyfish, crabs, turtles, and there are other motifs about the monument. There is a plaque cast from the metal recovered from the Maine, which can be found in many places around the United States. Touch it and you will be close